interminable line of such prognostications over the last 3 years. This is a political statement more than anything else in the propaganda war by the Remainer establishment that refuses to accept, as the Cabinet Secretary just let the cat out of the bag in his final words, refuses to accept the referendum result of 2 years ago where 17.5 million people voted to leave the EU. He knows as well as I do that most aircraft components would be tariff-free under WTO rules, and even in the few cases where they would be subject to tariffs, those tariffs would be very, very low, certainly less than 5%. But, of course, we all want a free trade deal with the EU. It makes common sense on both sides. But the obstacle to this deal isn't Theresa May, it's Michel Barnier and the EU Commission, because they put the political interests of the unelected European federalist establishment ahead of the economic well-being of the people of Europe. A free trade deal is clearly in the interests of EU citizens, because last year they sold to us £192 billion more in goods than we sold to them. So if they had to face reciprocal tariffs to compensate for the ones that would be imposed upon us as a result of a Brexit no deal, then there would be massive convulsions in the EU as well. And given that, to take up one point which the Cabinet Secretary mentioned in his remarks a moment ago about the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders joining Airbus in as prophets of doom, 14% of every single vehicle produced in Germany is exported to the United Kingdom. If they had to face a 10% tax upon imports to this country as a result of doing the same to us, exporting to the EU, that would be massively against the interests of German motor manufacturers. So I hope that these individuals are putting as much pressure upon Monsieur Barnier to agree a free trade deal as their counterparts in this country are doing to the United Kingdom government to give in to every demand of the EU establishment. I'd like to know, for example, if Airbus bigwigs have written to Monsieur Barnier to complain about his point-blank refusal to discuss a sensible free trade deal, as agreed recently with Canada and a few years ago with South Korea. Why shouldn't we have a deal of that kind? What is the political objection to that? That a company like Airbus should act as an accomplice of a hostile foreign power seeking to undermine British interests, I think is disgraceful. But I wonder whether this might be in some way connected to the $18 billion worth of illegal state aid which they've received from European governments in recent years, as recently adjudicated only a month ago by the World Trade Organization. As a result of that, the US Trade Representative has said this paves the way for the United States to impose retaliatory tariffs upon EU goods. You know, this is not the way to go if we are to have sensible policy making in Europe. And I hope that the Welsh Government will agree with me in that respect. But this statement today, of course, is really an illusory one, because there is no prospect whatsoever of Airbus closing down its entire operations in this country. Where otherwise would the wings for the plane be made? It isn't so easy just to close down and transfer to other parts of Europe or the world. But you know, let's look at the context in which this statement has been put out. There are how many huge companies have made similar prognostications of doom which have been overtaken by events and shown to be false in recent years. Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein made some of the most apocalyptic statements about the effects of Brexit, and yet in April this year, opening a new £1 billion office complex in London, he said, "I was wrong. I thought there would have been a worse outcome. The UK economy has surprised on the upside." Look at Siemens, again. Joe Kaiser, a massive Remainer, said that Brexit would disrupt the economy, uncertainty about the relationship with the EU would have significant negative long-term effects, UK would be a less attractive place to do business, maybe a factor when Siemens considers future investment here, and yet in November 2017, whilst cutting 3,000 jobs in Germany and 1,000 across Europe, he announced an investment of £39 million to expand its largest UK plant in Lincoln, which employs 1,500 people. And just to turn to Airbus, finally, and its previous remarks in this respect, of course, Airbus say now they will pull investment, whatever that might be, or may pull investment, whatever that means, if there is no deal. It's hedged around with so many ifs and buts and caveats, it's impossible to draw any conclusions from it. But only 2 years ago, of course, Tom Enders was one of the chief players in Project Fear during the referendum campaign. In intervention after intervention, he threatened to pull investment if the company voted to leave. And yet, of course, they haven't done that. Since then, he has admitted that the company plans to retain its operations, and I quote, long into the future. He wrote to Greg Clark in February of this year to say that they regard the UK as a home country and a competitive place to invest. The home country reference, of course, is important because that means that within the economic strategy development within the company, Airbus's national divisions are regarded as a priority and influence the decisions on production and strategy. So what this is all about, actually, is trying to make sure that no deal is well and truly off the table. Well, he hardly needs to do that because Theresa May's incompetence and the shambolic government which have completely wrecked the whole Brexit opportunities that were presented 2 years ago have already achieved that objective. In effect, we will remain part of the EU in form, if not in name. So Airbus has nothing to worry about.
Cabinet Secretary.
It's embarrassing, frankly. I hope nobody within any industrial sector and no investors have listened to this contribution. But just one quick question that's been playing on my mind whilst listening to the member. Where is the member that is supposed to be representing the 6,500 people in Broughton within your party right now? I don't see the UKIP member for North Wales present behind you cheering what you are saying. I don't see her supporting what you are saying about the future of the Airbus plant. It is frankly shameful that you choose to rubbish not just Airbus, but the likes of, you are rubbishing Airbus. You are rubbishing their concerns. You are claiming that the likes of Oxford Economics are merely opposed to Brexit and therefore motivated by one factor rather than carrying out objective analysis on behalf of Airbus. I don't know whether you've read the impact of Airbus on the UK economy. I don't know whether you visited any of the Airbus sites. You have. Have you visited the Broughton site recently? Have you spoken with senior managers? Because you surely haven't listened to them. The words may have been spoken, but look, my message would be really clear. Get out of your trench, take off your earplugs and listen to people who know about the aerospace sector a hell of a lot more than you do, because 6,500 jobs in Broughton are on the line. 400 to 500 in Newport are on the line. This company does not play petty party politics. This company is an international operation that is determined to make sure that it has future growth. And if it can't do that in the UK, it will do it elsewhere. And this isn't just about tariffs. You know, the member seems to think that the only question in town in terms of Brexit is whether we have to apply tariffs. It's not about tariffs for Airbus. It's very clear, if you read the impact of Airbus on the UK economy, that actually it's about the movement of people and it's a regulatory environment that could cause severe disruption. And in terms of car imports, are you seriously suggesting that consumers would be happy to pay an extra 10% for cars that are imported into Britain, in spite of the fact that a huge number of components of those cars are actually made in Britain? That jobs depend on those cars that are, okay, their final assembly may take place outside of Britain, but the jobs that supply the components are actually here within the UK, and therefore tariffs will have a major impact. They would have a major impact, and they would lead, within the supply chain, they could lead to considerable loss of jobs. Look, these are warnings, and at what point are you going to actually accept that warnings need to be heeded, that you cannot ignore warnings, that a no-deal scenario would be far more damaging for the UK economy than a decent Brexit deal? And instead, you just want to march full steam ahead to a cliff without any due regard for the 6,500 people employed at Airbus in Broughton, the 400 to 500 that are employed in. I notice that the member is making comments from a sedentary position. If he has an intervention to make, I'd happily take it.
No, there are no interventions.
But in terms of,
I would ask all. A minute. I will ask all members just listen to the Cabinet Secretary. You've asked a set of questions, and you should listen to what the answers are.
And in terms of, finally, in terms of the point that the member made concerning false false warnings that have taken place elsewhere in the industry, not just concerning Brexit, but other historical other factors. Look, one big point to bear in mind is that many politicians only woke up to the threats that Tata were making and the concerns that Tata were expressing when the businesses here in Wales and across the UK were put up for sale. Will it take the loss of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs in the UK for those who are championing a no-deal scenario to actually wake up and accept that they were wrong and that they put people out of work?
Thank you. Jack Sargent.
Deputy Presiding Officer, can I start by thanking the Cabinet Secretary for bringing forward this